So I've been on Zoom before, but I've never done a slide talk quite like this. Um, so bear with me if there's any technical glitches. I've done my best to kind of work it out, but yeah, here we go. My name is Johnston Foster. Welcome to you all. I'm honored to have the opportunity to do this talk and talk about my practice and my work. Um, I have to admit, I'm a little nervous. I haven't done a talk like this in about 4 years, and I've never done one virtually. And for some reason, I've been a little in my head about it. And you could give me a slide projector and a carousel of slides and a room full of people, and I could probably just do it without even thinking about it. But for some reason, this is kind of set me off kilter. But we'll see what we can do. I'd like to thank everyone at the Chester Art Center for Um, inviting me to do this and to giving me an opportunity to have an exhibition at the end of the summer. I'm quite flattered, and I'd like to thank Sue and Beverly and Trudy for all their help and everyone at the board. And yeah, it's quite an honor, and I'm flattered. Thank you so much. I live in Halifax or Chibuktuk, and more specifically in Quebec, also known as Bedford. And that's where I live with my family, and I have my studio. And I moved up to Canada about 9 years ago from the States, where I'm originally from. And I was born in Virginia in a small town called South Boston, near the North Carolina border. And I moved to a small town in Buena Vista in the mountains in Virginia, and eventually in 1988, my family and I moved to Williamsburg, Virginia, where we're kind of I spent my adolescence and sort of my kind of my stomping ground years, I guess. And I have to my parents are here, and I have to give them a lot of credit. Hi, Mom and Dad. I love you very much. They've been always very supportive of my creative endeavors and encouraging me to follow my passions. And even though when they didn't always seem quite the safest or smartest choice at the time, but they've always been there for me. And without their exposure to art and museums and things like that, I never would have probably found this passion and been able to articulate it and explore it the way I have. So they've always been there to help support me and encourage me, and I'm forever in debt and gratitude to them, and I love them very much. What I've got showing here on this video is sort of a process video of a piece I made last year, and I figured it's just a really good introduction just to sort of my hands-on style and just sort of how I make things. And I figured I'd just be a good introduction while I work and move along. But I've always been making things. I've always been creative. I've always been interested in art and craft and kind of having projects and in doing things and keeping myself busy and creativity in general. I grew up on a steady diet of television and movies and cartoons and comic books and skateboarding, building tree houses and forts, and very sort of adolescent 1980s 1990s stuff the kids were into. And I think a lot as I progressed and became interested in art making, naturally those approaches to building skateboard ramps or tree houses or just sort of that raw kind of creativity that's very intuitive and guttural was kind of the approach I'd always kind of made with my art. And I realized that I never really had quite a skill set for really technical things. And even in my approach, in my, attempt to learn those things, I always kind of went back to the more handmade, show my work kind of maneuvers, as you can see in this stuff. So when I was in high school, I was not directionless, but I didn't have a whole lot of like focus on where I was going to do after school or going to university and what I was going to focus on or study. And I have to give a lot of credit to, this video is just going to repeat while I just finish this intro. But when I was in grade 11, I met a photography teacher named Mrs. Phyllis Ketsis, who was very encouraging and took me under her wing. And I really got into photography. And up until that point, I had a lot of good art teachers, but not one that had sort of encouraged me to the point where she did and inspired me. And so when I started looking at schools, I was focusing on photography. And I applied to the art school in Richmond, Virginia Commonwealth University, with the idea that I would go to design school and focus on photography. As soon as I got there, I fell in with a bunch of really awesome people that I have lifelong friends with still, and pretty much was encouraged like, man, you don't need to go into photography, you need to make sculpture. So I told this to my parents, and they're like, no, you're going to go to design school. There's no sculpture in this. And luckily they allowed me to do that. And I tested it out, and it's really where my passion was. And I focused, that's where I've been ever since, right? And I haven't really taken photos since then, believe it or not. So before I get moving, I just want to introduce you to one important character in my art making. And this is a guy named Bob Cage. He's actually from South Boston, Virginia, where I was born. And I was introduced to Bob right after undergrad when I left Virginia Commonwealth on my way to go to grad school in New York City. Bob was around the same age as my grandfather. And he is like sort of like a local legend character and kind of one of those most interesting men in the world kind of characters. He's like a world champion tobacco auctioneer. He's also like a tennis champion, and he's also an accomplished and amazing artist on his own. He actually studied art in Africa on the tobacco market. And he came back to Virginia, and he has a piece of land there that over the years, and he started filling this property with his sculpture. And this is Bob in his later years at home. He passed just a few years ago. But this is Cage Farm, and this is this magical field and property that he lived on. And from the road, Cage Trail, you could drive down and you saw these just magical assemblage sculptures made from a variety of found objects and things that he got from like defunct and out of business textile factories, tobacco factories, farm equipment, all kinds of things. Like this thing's like a 20-foot tall hummingbird, and it's made completely from the templates used to cut leather in shoes. So you can imagine just driving down the country road and taking a turn onto this, and this is what you find, and it's just this fantastically magical place. This is a crazy sculpture. These are all toilets. These are all urinals, right? But Bob was a really amazing and encouraging influence on me. And when I was teaching, I would often take my classes there to visit him and, show him this magical place. And just, he's just always been inspiring to me. And I look back on just like we're from the same hometown, and his process and his magic and wonder and whimsy, I've always tried to capture in my own work. This is a bridge on his property where his goats climb over the bridge to cross the road, and they like maintain the fields of the sculpture garden. So it is just a magical, wonderful place. And I think I owe, to give Bob a shout out. And he's a legend in South Boston and Virginia, and not widely known, but a pretty, well-known local character. Just 1 second, sorry. Okay, so in undergrad, I was introduced to a wide variety of artists, techniques, processes. I met tons of interesting teachers and students, And this is sort of like going in. I had a pretty, I was informed about art, but when I went to art school, my mind was expanded and blown, and I was encouraged by my peers and my teachers, but we were experimenting. We were doing lots of different things. But I'll just sum up my art. There's a lot of hits and misses in undergrad, but this sculpture, which is a giant sea urchin made of traffic cones, was sort of, I look at it as the microorganism that crawled out of the ocean and then eventually started to sort of evolve into a four-legged creature, what my work eventually became. I was always attracted to the found object, probably because I couldn't make anything on my own, and I wasn't very good at like crafting things. So, starting with the found object was always a really good place to be. But I also have always been a collector, and I think that comes from collecting scrap wood to build tree houses and skateboard ramps. And I've also just been sort of like a compulsive, obsessive kind of person in general. And as you can tell behind me, I'm quite a collector. So this has always been a natural impulse, but I've always been attracted to art that kind of works in these modes. I also am obsessed with skateboarding. I'm not very good at skateboarding, but this sculpture was requested by a very well-known skate photographer that I knew in college, and he wanted to shoot a photo of his buddy, who's sort of like a local hometown hero, doing skate tricks over it. And it was the first time all three of us were actually published in a skateboard magazine. So I can always say it was my first published work, but I was also like, I was never going to get in a skateboard magazine on my own, but my sculpture did. And this crazy guy, Travis, was like, he got naked and he ollied over this thing on the fly. And this epic photo has sort of made the rounds in the skateboard magazines. So it's this is kind of the origins of where my work went. So I moved to New York to go to grad school. And the first year was a very interesting year. I moved there literally a month before 9/11. So, young kid from Virginia moving to New York City, trying to find my footing, trying to settle in such a, important event happened, life-changing sort of paradigm shift. And trying to find my footing and figure out, what am I doing as an artist, and what do I have to say as an artist? Who am I? What's important? And like kind of being lost. This is a compilation video of the things I made the first year of undergrad, of grad school. This is a piece called The Machine, and it pretty much encapsulates all the things I've been interested in my entire career of working. It's these kinetic images, these hands saying shame, shame, a knife cuts the balloons pop, confetti comes down on the machine. It's like its own world. There's a garden at the bottom of it. There's the space, the inner workings of the world. There's the underworld of the garden, this tinkering, these problem solvings, all found objects. This is another piece I made, and I was really interested in kinetics and machine. I think the gimmick of things that had motors and things that moved, and this is all made of vinyl siding, and this beehive is like styrofoam that I poured wood glue all over, and it kind of is like the beginnings of my wood glue obsession, in which makes honey, right? So I really am interested in these materials that transform and are becoming something new, becoming something different, evolving and changing beyond what their original purpose is. This is a poster that I bought at the bus station at Port Authority outside of Times Square, where my studio was near. You've got this motor and it's poking Britney Spears in the back with this straw. I wanted to make the poster come to life. I made some videos when I was in school. This is the last video I ever made, and this is just a sample cut from a film that I looped for 12 hours. So here we have the hunky Brad Pitt, romantically, thoughtfully looking off, looking forlorn, and bam. And this goes on for hours. I just thought it was funny. And it was just like this experimenting with looping, found imagery. There's a lot, as we go into the work, you'll see there's a like dark undertones to the work. A lot of the things are like covered up in color and sort of carnival-like wonder, but there's also like a lot of like dark undertones that it just sort of naturally come through. This is a miniature couch I built, which is probably 3 or 4 feet long, and then a found water pipe bong that I bought from a head shop, and there's a smoke machine inside, so the thing sits there and smokes by itself. So at this point in time, I was building things and learning to make things, but I was also like, they were kind of like jokes. And then my second semester of my first year in grad school, I had met a guy named Jules debalincourt and a really good friend of mine from growing up. His name was Andy Cross. We decided our second semester of school that we wanted to build a collaborative project. We were kind of lost in what we wanted to make with art. 9/11 had happened. We were really rethinking like where we were with our art practices, what we were doing, what our motivations were. And we're like, let's get back to the root of things. Let's go back to like what's fun about making art, or like what's fun, what did we like to make as kids? And we're like, let's make a treehouse. So we were really lucky to have these massive studios in New York City, which is very rare. And we literally built a treehouse in our studio. And so for about 3 months, the three of us, day in and day out, built an actual tree out of found materials, built the tree house, and it was a function. You could get inside of it, you could hang out. And it was this major like shift for us, all three of us. And I look back at all of our work from that point, and this is sort of like the jumping board for where all of our practices went. And I look back at this as sort of like the origin of like how I really learned to make things, and kind of me finding my own voice as an artist. That machine at the very beginning was the first thing I made once the treehouse was finished. Okay, so there's another photo of the treehouse. This was an exhibition. Jules is primarily a painter, but he went on and has gone on to become a very successful, and he's a very amazing artist and painter. And but his very first exhibition in New York, he included the treehouse, and we were all credited with it. But this is a really great photo of it. You could walk up the steps, you could get inside of it. Like I said, it's completely functional. It's made of like lots of different materials, very psychedelic. But like I said, it starts the sort of beginnings of like where we're at as artists and like what we're doing and how we want to make things. And I really see this as like the origins of where I've gone and where I am now. This is a painting of Jules's. Like I said, he primarily is a painter now. This is probably like an 8 by 6 foot painting. And this is another painting of Jules, and you can see the obvious connection to the treehouse. You can see the same sort of palette. Jules debalincourt, if you're interested, he's worth looking up. This is Andy Cross. Andy Cross was the other guy that made the treehouse with me. Andy and I met in 1988 when I moved to Williamsburg in Virginia. He and I have been lifelong friends, and he has been one of my biggest, like, we've always, even though we haven't lived together or like been around in the same town for a while, we always like, we talk shop about art. We've always been inspired by one another. We always like, discuss our ideas, and he's always been like a huge motivator for my practice. And Andy has always like, it really was in high school, was like that one kid that I connected with creating and making art with. And we eventually went to undergrad with and went to grad school together. So we were kind of tied at the hip for a long time. And creatively, he motivated me. I wouldn't call it competition, but he definitely kept me on my toes. In undergrad, he spent his first year at James Madison University. And he transferred, and when he showed up at VCU his third year of school, he was just ready to go, and he was just sort of blowing people's minds with his motivation and his work ethic. And like he checked me and made me realize like I need to up my game, and I'm not going to let my childhood friend outdo me. So like I really appreciate Andy's motivation and inspiration, and he's really important to me creatively and just as like one of my oldest friends. This is a painting called a sculpture called House Painter, and it's an actual house that is made of like hundreds of paintings that Andy did over a 5 or 6 year period. And it's actually a functioning art studio. This is another one of Andy's paintings. So you can see, I think you can go back and see the treehouse in a lot of this stuff and the connections of where we've been. Okay, so I'm in New York. I'm making stuff. I'm in grad school. I'm trying my best to like, find my own voice after the treehouse. And this is the body of work that I ended up making. And this was actually the first exhibition that I had in New York. I'm still working with kinetics and machines. And, but you can see a lot of the imagery, the colors are very the same. This is like a cannibal's roasting fire pit. I made all the bones. So I'm using found materials. I'm collecting like woods and like vinyl siding and plastics. But a lot of these things are still like, I'm buying some of this stuff or I'm painting some of the things. They're not all completely natural, if that's the right word to say. But I'm embracing the found object the best I can. These are giant Venus flytraps, and they've got these like, they're made of duct tape and foam and plastics and wires and rubber gloves. I apologize for the video quality. It's pretty bad, early 2000s. Like, I'm not a cinematographer, but they've got these little weasel ball toys inside of the flower pots that are rolling around, which cause the plants to like twitch and move. I mowed a lot of lawns growing up in Williamsburg. So I was inspired to make a lawnmower sculpture. So this is like, part of that is made from a slide projector. But here on the underside, you've got this poor turtle has been sacrificed to the lawn care gods. So there's like a lot of humor. There's a lot of tinges of violence and darkness, but kind of this candy-colored sort of approach to it. This is a giant peacock I made. I came upon a lot of pipe cleaners and then dusters from the dollar store. I'm walking around New York City and I'm like, either I'm finding things directly on the streets of New York, or I'm going into like dollar stores and finding like mass-made cheap materials. And this is just like a giant, boisterous like peacock that's just, strutting his stuff. And there's a motor inside that causes him to shake and sort of flutter. This next piece is the last piece in the show, and we'll get to it in just a second. This is called Reason Belongs in the Wilderness. Almost there. It's just a big, obnoxious peacock. And I could think when I made that show, I was sort of like, I wanted to show off. And that's kind of the metaphor there. So I had this idea that I wanted to make a chandelier, but I wanted to activate the chandelier. And how do I make a chandelier move? And I was like, oh, well, of course, I'll make a raccoon that flew his kite into it. So it's got this sort of Charlie Brown level of humor. And like I said, I was talking about cartoons and influence of pop culture. And this raccoon, I love raccoons because they're always getting in your garbage. They're always going through your stuff. They're always messing and making a mess. They're mischievous creatures. And this elegant, beautiful chandelier made of plywood and is as well crafted as I could make it, is swinging. His kite is stuck in. This thing is swinging violently around the gallery, and it's causing the viewers to sort of, judge their space and where they're at, and it's, moving the space. All right, so that was my first exhibition in New York. And then after that, I was sort of over kinetic sculptures. And I was like, I don't want to work with motors anymore. They break too much. They're hard to maintain. And I was sort of feeling like there was a gimmick to them. So I was like, how do I make sculptures that move on their own? How do I make things that don't need machines or this gimmick to actually create movement and action? I was invited to go to an art residency in the Czech Republic. And this was the sculpture that I made there. And this was the first sculpture that I made where I stayed outside of Prague, and I had this amazing studio in an old Renaissance castle that was out in the countryside, and I was limited to literally what was available within the grounds of this little mini castle. And so it was the first time that I couldn't go to a store and buy things. I couldn't use money to sort of solve a problem. And I created this large installation of these giant eagles made of chain link fence and bicycle tubes attacking a herd of wild boar. And this whole room is probably about 30, 40 feet long. And these pigs are like roughly life size. And these eagles are like 8, 10 feet wide. It's the space that we built it in was like an old stable. And the castle had a lot of history in it. Like at one time was like the base for Nazi officers, and then later a communist work farm. So it had a very interesting and dark history. And this piece is called "Celebrate the New Dark Age." But this was a huge breakthrough for me because it was all found materials, all found colors, and all crafted from one location. And I'm really interested in like alchemic approaches to making something out of nothing, creating things from limited resources and getting a maximum potential. And this was a huge breakthrough for me. There's a close-up of the pigs. These are made of like a plastic, like concrete. They have like kind of like nipple buttons all over them that kind of give them this like warthog look. I come back to New York, and my studio at school was outside of in Hell's Kitchen, right by the Port Authority bus terminal. So I was constantly collecting traffic cones that were being smashed by the city buses coming in and out of the city. And the materials often tell me what they need to make. Like it goes both ways, but the materials often dictate what they can be. And in this case, they were like, this is a rhino. They look like the hide of a rhinoceros. So this is the result of that. This was my thesis exhibition at Hunter College, where I went to grad school. And this was sort of a grand culmination of all the different projects I had made the entire 4 years I was in grad school. There's materials in there that I used from like the first semester I came to school. And this is sort of a giant microcosm of a sculpture. And my original idea was to make a trophy room with trophy heads surrounding all the walls and a pool table in the middle. But I thought that was kind of like, it could be a little bit more developed, and it was a little boring. So I ended up I imploded those ideas, and it became this one unified object. So it was like a billiard table that was a ship with a tree growing out of it. And the fruit of the tree are actually the snooker balls, and all of the trophy heads are mounted directly to the pool table. And so every head of the animals are made of different materials. And it was actually sort of like a physical challenge, conceptual challenge too, because like every day I'd go into the studio and I would make a new animal head, and I'd like from start to finish in one day. So, using my limitations, using raw materials, and like, okay, today I'm going to make a hippo, and I did it. And today I'm going to make a wild boar, and I'll do it, and just sort of this intuitive, spontaneous making, and in this, kind of wild conglomerate of different ideas imploded in on itself. This piece was called Fair Game. After New York, my girlfriend at the time and now wife, we moved. She's from Canada. So we decided to leave New York, and we moved up to New Brunswick, and we spent a year living in rural New Brunswick between St. John and Sussex. and I was preparing for my second show in New York, and this is one of the pieces that I made. This piece is called Good and Plenty. I've always been fascinated by sculptural objects that are domestic, and like the cornucopia, which is like a centerpiece for Thanksgiving. And I like this idea of like, well, what would I do if I made that? And I was always trying to figure out how could I make this, and so I ended up just making this giant cornucopia made of garbage. And the cornucopia itself is made out of blown out tires that I found on the side of the road, and I like wrapped them up together to make the horn itself. And I was driving up 95 on the East Coast and collecting these things when I would drive back and forth from Canada to New York. And all of the garbage is actually garbage made out of garbage. And you've got aluminum cans made of scrap metal. There's pizzas in there made of wood glue again. The wood glue pops up again. And my favorite are like little Q-tips that you see there that I dipped in wood glue to make earwax. There's like rotten salads, and every little thing is made. I was having dreams about cornucopias when I was making this, and like obsessively every day making garbage out of garbage. So there's like another theme of my work has just been like, environmental concerns and environmentalism and the abundance and overindulgence of our consumer culture. Another piece from that exhibition was this crazy flying golf cart. I wanted to make, how do I make a golf cart fly? Well, of course, I'll give him Santa's reindeer as, to make it fly. When I was a child, visiting South Boston, I mischievously got in a golf cart at the local country club pool. The keys were still in, and I drove it down a concrete flight of steps and almost killed myself. So I've always had this golf cart sort of thing in my head, and that's where that's like the origins of this sculpture. This is all the reindeer are made of carpet that I found, scrap wood. The canopy of the golf cart is umbrella. This is the first actual figurative attempt at like a human figure I ever made. Pretty crude piece, but this is about 25 feet long. This is another piece I made while I was in New Brunswick. I've always loved that sculpture. You may be familiar of it, but it's Romulus and Remus in Rome suckling the she-wolf. So I decided, whenever I don't have a good idea or I'm lacking inspiration, recreate a classical sculpture or a mystical beast from mythology. So this is the she-wolf, and this is called Mama's Boys. And again, this is all foam and astroturf. And here are the babies underneath the mom suckling the teat. And I try to get the baby fat rolls and the flesh of the babies. And that's all wood, and it's painted with wood glue again. So after New York, after New Brunswick, I moved back to New York, and I spent a summer building this crazy sculpture. And again, I was sort of looking at sculptural objects from domestic settings. And of course, I went back to the Christmas tree, which, is something that was always in our house every year. And I was like, well, if I made a Christmas tree, what would the theme be? What would the materials be? What would the ornaments be? And of course, I decided it could be anything. There is no rhyme or reason. So here you see a gasoline can, a ball and chain, a dynamite igniter, a hoagie sandwich, a hourglass, mushrooms, a tomahawk, and scalp, And this was another project where like I made the tree, and every day I would make an ornament for it. That was my goal for the day. This is actually a found solar system that I found on the street in New York City. Just totally random. And I was wanting to make a solar system, and I found one, and it's just complete, serendipity. A trumpet. So this piece is important because a lot of these materials and a lot of the imagery in this will go on to become their own sculptures in their own. A rat trap, a lobster, keys, cigarette butts, a bird nest with eggs, a black heart, And again, this is sort of me, a chainsaw, and it was covered and surrounded by mobiles of different objects. So it was like these orbiting objects. That torch, you see that torch there? That's an actual torch that I found on the streets of New York. Like someone was walking around with a torch. I couldn't resist. Lots of different things. There's a whole summer just sort of focusing on this crazy sculpture. A volcano made of hot glue, a bear trap and a hot dog, uh, a skateboard made from scratch, a microscope made from tubes and plumbing, a shark. Okay, I go to New York and I go back. Actually, I go back to New Brunswick. And as a child, I'd always heard this urban myth about seagulls, and if you ever fed them Alka-Seltzer, they would explode. Has anyone ever heard this? Um, what a great idea for a sculpture, I thought. So I'm literally made a flock of seagulls, and a series of them are like exploding in mid-flight. And I would cut them open and insert all this shredded plastic to imitate their innards and guts and stuff. And then I would pump them full of expanding foam to give them the illusion that they're foaming at the mouths and exploding. This is a piece called, this piece was called, actually, this is called What the Flock. This is a piece called Beast of Burden. This is an 8-foot long giant lobster made of old red trash cans, smoking. A lot of my ideas, I don't think about the meaning or the concepts. I just have visual ideas. I really always sort of tried to stick to the modus operandi of make it, figure it out later. I don't have a lot of perceived concepts. And like this artist talk where I'm just rambling and making it up as I go along, that's exactly how my process is. I just make, I figure it out later. This is a shot of my studio. I eventually moved back to Virginia once I got married. And this is an example of just the complete chaos and obsessive compulsiveness of my studio. This is actually what my studio looked like at the time, about 11 years ago, and just a hoarder style, just bringing whatever in. And believe it or not, there's an organization to this, which is like my wife would come in and like be trying to find something, and I would notice that things were missing, and she was like, "You're absolutely crazy. How is that even possible?" Right? But the landlord came in one day and was like, "This is you can't do this. Like, this is a hazard. You're gonna get evicted. The fire department's gonna shut us down." So it's just it is indulgent. When I moved back to Virginia in this studio here, I built this piece, which is called Mob Deep, and it's I wanted to make angry mob, and this piece is really interesting because I feel like in the last year it's taken on a whole new level of concept and meaning, through like the Black Lives Matter movement to the insurrection at the Capitol in the US. Like the angry mob has sort of like it's in our vernacular more than ever, and is like has a presence than we've ever seen. But like I wanted to make something that was inspired at the time more like the angry mob that raids Frankenstein's castle, but this was like all of these characters are like about 3.5 feet tall. So when you enter the space, you are the monster. Like you're the Frankenstein's monster. Like you're towering above them, but they've all united as a single group, and they're pointing at you, and you could join, go around to the back and join the mass. And these are made of like, textiles that I found. Every little thing I could get out of that studio to make these figures. And this was the first attempt at really making figurative sculpture. So of course I over the top and I made 75 separate individuals, figures. This is a piece called Big Tipper, a massive 2-headed Galapagos tortoise with a banquet on its back that's about to slide off. Garbage cans, he's snatched a shrimp off of the banquet table. Here we have this like extravagant table, like, teetering on the edge of disaster. Lobsters, pigs, oysters, turkeys. Again, like what can I make out of whatever I've got in my hand? There's asparagus, is there, baguettes, like, tons of materials. This is a piece called Altered Beast, two giant roosters in a cockfight beheading each other at the same time. You can see their heads are being removed and the blood splattering out. This is made of like lots of different shredded plastics. The rooster head. This is called Whole Lot of Love. This is a 5-foot tall giant black heart, all made of metal, plastic auto parts. You know, the idea of like the physical idea of like a black heart, the anatomical, but it's, you know, physically, it's all made of black materials. Sharks. Again, these are just sort of intuitive, working from my gut. How do you make a shark? You know, I love it, like putting it on the cone to give it action and movement. The cone becomes a pedestal. This one's sitting on a globe of the earth. This was a piece I made in Hamburg, Germany at a residency. This is called High Plains Drifter, a cactus piece. We'll see more cactuses. These coyote and a poor little lap dog lost in the desert. And this was all made from the streets of Hamburg, Germany. This is all made out of like mop heads. A rooster made out of this beautiful, amazing golden Venetian blind I found. A rattlesnake mixed in there. This sort of like, almost like Natural History Museum vignettes. This is a beehive I created out of melted plastics, and these sort of take on their own life and kind of pop up in a lot of different works eventually. This is a piece called The Keeper, which was made out of shredded orange traffic cones and about 15 feet long, and just this like 10-legged mutant caterpillar tiger. And this was a cool, what I love about this piece technically is that the surface is the armature. It literally was woven together. There's no armature beneath it. Now, I'm like, I don't know, where like fantasy, these mutant creatures, it's, you know, I don't know. I look at this and it's like looking back at the work over the years, it's like, what was I thinking? I don't know. Like, I just, you know, I love the act of creating for the sake of creating, and I feel like my own passions and my concerns socially, spiritually, they end up coming through it through osmosis. And of course, it's like holding a beehive in its tail, almost symbiotically. You can see its back haunches are covered in bees, as if they're like living in unison. I wanted to make a pizza fly, so you've got these bees lifting the pizza slices directly out, and again, the wood glue comes through. The wood glue is like this ongoing, amazing material that just has so many different uses and personalities. A dead shark that's been like gutted, and you know, the poor babies are like being birthed prematurely into this puddle of blood. This is all made of like linoleum and vacuum hoses. A unicorn sinking in a tar pit on a oriental rug. This was called Final Fantasy. I made this in Germany, and I had a little girl in German ask me if she could go into the basement because she wanted to see the feet of the unicorn coming through the ceiling. And I was like, wow, it's believable. You know, I always remember that story. It was really flattering and cute. This is my backyard when I moved my studio to my house. And again, you can see like the variety of materials and furniture, wooden furniture starts to become a huge material that I start like working and practicing with. This is in my backyard too. These were wood projects that I did with my with my students when I was teaching. And when we were done with, you literally would take those model dinosaurs and blow them up to life-size scale. And when we were done with them, they were like, well, what are we going to do with them? I'm like, well, I'm going to put them in my yard, which is literally what I did. So I had these like dead dinosaur skeletons rotting in my backyard, which is a crazy installation in itself. I moved away from working in these sort of large-scale, labor-intensive pieces for a while and started working more intuitively and trying to make things that were faster and quicker. So I started working and making these masks and these heads. And these were just sort of, again, found objects, making something in one session, in just one evening in the studio. How many moves can I make? How many materials can I make to add to create like a face that literally looks back at me? Like as soon as I could see it looking at me, I would finish these pieces. So there's like a shoe for the beak, these crow heads. I was trying to work quicker and faster. In doing this process, I started to get a little bit more like loose, but starting to take that looseness from these pieces and get more fine-tuned at the same time. These are larger versions of these. And these are more like monolithic, and like I was looking at a lot of like prehistoric masks and more like indigenous things and like less contemporary art, and being influenced by these sort of like totems and like powerhead kind of imagery. This is like 10 feet tall. Okay, so I'm running out of time. I'm gonna try to rush through this. But the current work I'm making for the show at the Chester Art Center is it's all furniture. So this is all the material is furniture. I've like reduced it. I've no plastics, no metals. I've like, as you can see behind me, my studio is just reduced completely to just found furniture. And this is one of the early pieces that utilizes the furniture. And this is this disembodied arm holding this turtle with a skull for a head. And this is a piece that comes after that. And this is called The Collector. That skeleton is actually made out of lawn chairs, but the little pony is made all out of furniture. And I show these because like I love this piece, but I started to get like, this is the origins of where the new body of work is. And of course, he's dragging a satchel with a beehive in it, and he's infested with himself. So we have this like lone pale rider struggling on the horse. This is sort of a feral man and like infested with bees. He's made out of furniture and wood too, but very raw. His beard and hair is made of shredded tires that I found on the highway. This is called The Lookout. This is another early furniture piece, like this weird sort of like giraffe with short legs. And this is called Northern. I made this piece literally right before I moved to Canada. It's called Northern Odyssey, and sort of serendipitously made before I decided to move to Canada with my family. This is a piece that's like pushing the wood boundaries again. I was invited to do a show about Greek mythology in Athens, Greece. So this is sort of a centaur, minotaur hybrid of like a couple, male and female, bonded as one. And you can see like they each have one horn that when together they form. I only had 2 of these pieces, and I was like, they don't have horns for each of them. And I was like, oh, but they complete each other. And this was one of those like happy accidents in the studio that, you know, they're unified. But another early furniture work. This is another piece from the Greek mythology show, and these are Cerberus, the 3-headed dog. But I always wanted to make a sculpture of like a pack of dogs, but instead I made a pack of Cerebuses, but they're all like lap dogs, like little like dogs you'd see at the park or like in New York City or something. So you've got like a sheepdog with a chihuahua and a little, a wiener dog and like another, like these different, the ultimate mutts. And these are made of like rugs and carpets and like just different textiles I was collecting. This is another Greek mythology piece. It's called the Out to Pasture, and it's like Medusa unicorn, a Medusa corn, as I would called it. But it's decapitated, and it's infested with snakes, and these are all made out of garden hoses. This is the skull of Medusa, again, like scrap metals. This is a really like interesting piece where the material and the content I think are really important. This is these pieces are called The Ambush, and it's a series of 3. And this is like a bird and a snake being attacked and devoured. And these are all made out of beer caps, and like the content of the material influences like what it is. Like when substances and overindulgence can sneak up on us and get the best of us. And here we have like an actual like physical articulation of that. This is called the Little Critter. This is just some crazy little monster I made out of like a found ceramic cat head and some bones and electrical wire. This is a piece that was inspired by the Golden Fleece. And I made this in Greece, and another early wooden piece. But it's like, instead of this our beautiful golden fleece, it's actually like a rotting black ram in a tree infested with snakes and birds. It's like the opposite of the idealized like golden lamb. This is like more recent work. This was all made in Canada, and we'll start flipping through this. I know we're running out of time and I'm totally rambling, but these are like the pale riders right on these decapitated heads. These are sort of based out of the work I did with the unicorn piece I showed you a second ago. These are all wall works. This is a piece called the cul-de-sac, and this is sort of like a dismembered arm that's got cactuses growing out of it. And I start to make works that are more like insular worlds within objects, and plant life has become like a very big theme in my work. This is a piece, is a giant hourglass with these sort of like terrarium theme, where each half of the hourglass has two, like a jungle and a desert within it, and this sort of skeleton living like, you know, this sort of person who's succumbed to the wilderness. Anatomical piece. This is called the Long Walker. We've got, you know, like half flesh, half exposed bone made out of, you know, wires and wood and plants. There's this two-headed bird that's taken the eyeball out of it. This is like about 9 feet tall. Meditations on death and survival, and you know, just I wanted to make a figurative work that was anatomical. Here's what we ended up with: this sort of tortured walking beast with a little bit of life still coming out of his form. So this was after this body of work, I was invited to do a big commission down in 21C Art Hotel Museum in Bentonville, Arkansas. And this is the studio that I rented in an old restaurant. And I built a giant beehive within the restaurant, and this is this me building it. And again, the wood glue, this is sort of like the grand culmination of my love affair with wood glue. This was a large scale piece, and I have to give a big shout out to my crew that helped me make this: Joe, Carrie, Smitty, and Stephanie. I never really work with a crew of people, but this was such a large scale big job that there's no way I could do it on my own. But this is the interior of the hotel restaurant, where the piece has been like not permanently installed, but a long term installation. But basically the restaurant, which is called the Hive, coincidentally they called it the Hive before I installed the piece and proposed it, so it was just another like coincidence, serendipitous moment. But basically the entire restaurant is infested with honeycomb and kudzu vines, which is like a common plant down in the South, which is sort of, you can't kill it, and grows everywhere and takes over everything. The only way to get rid of it is like burn it or dig it up. But the entire restaurant is infested, and hidden amongst all the honeycomb and the vines are different various objects and creatures beside the bugs. And I imagine this piece is, there's like a skull hidden in the vines. I imagine this piece is sort of like post-apocalyptic mutant bees that have infested the world that's left over. And and of course I'm concerned about, honeybees and the pollinators that are struggling in our environment, and our, man's effect on the natural world. The two-headed crow pops up again, keeping watch over everything. Another human heart. A two-headed blue jay. The blue jays pop up. I've got a squad of blue jays that live in my backyard that are like a constant inspiration. All of the vines are made of garden hoses that I've collected over the years. Okay, this is a piece. This is my friend Rose Wilson, who some of you may know. lives in Chester, and she commissioned this piece for her boathouse in Chester. And this is an example of me not using found objects, but really trying to make something that's could be outside, like a public artwork. So I learned how to manipulate the metal and weld it together, which is sort of a new thing for me. Okay, I know we're running out of time. We'll get through this. This is the last body of work, and these pieces are, again, kind of smaller, more intimate works. I was working in a smaller studio. They're wall pieces. This is a piece inspired by the haruspics, which is sort of like an ancient method of telling the future, where they would like gut animals or birds, and they could sort of tell the future by the innards of these creatures. This two-headed bird, and this is all vinyl siding and electrical parts. Again, sort of looking at the inner workings and these sort of mini worlds within objects. And this is a piece called Valley of the Universe. And this PVC pipe has been melted and molded into a human skull. And in the inside, there's a waterfall and a river. This is called the Hand of Mysteries. This is inspired by like sort of like ancient alchemic imagery. And this is my own interpretation of it, but a lot of the common themes, you've got like an eye in the middle of the hand. And like I'm looking at a lot of like mystical imagery, sort of like dark arts kind of stuff. Again, the bees pop up as one of the fingers, and there's the snakes, the skeleton again. I love skateboarding. I made this, like, I have a really bad knee. I inspired this piece with this dismembered leg with the skateboard, with this rat hanging off the end of the skateboard. Again, this is all made of whatever I can get my hands on. Vinyl siding. Another skull. This is sort of an ongoing series of pieces. There's a swamp inside of this one. This is called Fortress of Solitude. Again, the bees pop up. This is called the Carrier. This is like a rotting fox. And this is all made out of like plastic tubes and vinyl siding. And in the interior is this a cavern with a river, an underground river. This is called what was this called? This is called the Descender. Another dismembered arm and a series of waterfalls, but like this hand is holding a giant bird's nest, if you can remember from the earlier Christmas tree sculpture, and this series of cascading waterfalls down this this human arm. This is about 8 feet tall. And then there's a series of works, and this is the last body of work I did up until like present, the last year. These sort of like bouquets of cactuses, and these are all made of garden hose. And each of these pieces are hung on the wall, and they have their own theme, like centerpiece. So again, this is called the bivouacker, and the skeleton mounted on there, meditating. This is called Magnet Tar Pit Trap. It's a lyric from a Nirvana song. Poor birds. This is inspired by a book I read by Cormac McCarthy called All the Pretty Horses, and there's this beautiful scene in this after a desert storm, and these birds they find these birds that have been blown into a cactus tree, and they're impaled on it, and this image really stuck with me, so that inspired this whole body of work. Sort of like beautiful, colorful, joyful bouquets of cactuses, but with these like tragic sort of endings. This is another human heart sort of inset. This piece is called Compass Rose. And here we are at the big end. And this is the piece that I began with. And this is the last piece I made that embraces all these found materials, these color pieces, before I sort of separated my, like kind of took a big break and shifted my work a bit. I made this piece last summer, and then at the beginning of the pandemic, I sort of started working almost exclusively in this wood. And I've for the past 18 months during the pandemic, I've just been hunkered down in the studio, focusing completely on furniture. And it wasn't a conscious decision to do that. It was more I had been stockpiling wood literally since I had moved to Canada, and I had filled my garage with like bins and bins of wood, and it's just sitting there. And I was like, okay, I'm going to restrict myself to one single material and see where it goes. And I started making these pieces, and I really was happy with the results. And because of the pandemic, I've been able to like slow down a bit and really focus on individual pieces that aren't, because a lot of the work that I just showed you is like large scale installation, big things. And a lot of the pieces I've been making are much more manageable and not much bigger than this object here that you're looking at. But I've been able to spend like a month or two on each piece, and the results I've been really interested and happy with. And the show in Chester is going to just be this big experiment of focusing on this one single material. And I'm not going to show much more because I want to kind of keep it a surprise for those of you who are local. But I don't know where it's going, and I probably won't always work in wood. But it's been really cool to kind of focus on a single material and not have much of like an agenda. And I've never, as an artist, like I've never had much of an agenda. I've always sort of made and thought about it as I went along with it. Like I said, it's making sculpture, and this has always been like, a, I mean, I don't lessen it, but it's always been about being present and in the moment and turning off the noise in my mind, or doing my best to do so. Um, but I also look at my process, and I like it's obviously an extension of my personality and my obsessions and my compulsions, and the hoarding and the work is like overdone, and it is a true reflection of who I am. And I want the work to be not only like like a mirror to ourselves, but also like a window, so we can like see the world differently, or see the world for it the way it is. And like I hope the work has a sense of criticality to it, but I also hope that I hope that criticality isn't too heavy handed, or didactic. But I above all, I hope there's a sense of like magic and wonder to it that brings joy to people when they view it. But and hopefully it's layered beyond just the imagery. But that's about it. I know I've gone on way too long.
That's okay, Johnston. Thank you. Do you want me
Yeah,
to?
we can take questions now and talk about pieces or whatever. I'm sorry.
Oh no, that was great. Thank you.